Welcome to tonight's live stream. I'm going to get started in a moment. I just need to let everybody on social media know the stream is on the air. Hello, Tech Talks. Glad to see you here. I'm gonna get on tonight's topic in a minute. I just wanted everybody to know I've been really busy today. I've filmed 4 videos that are going to be coming up this week, and I was working on a new comic script for Isis the Beauty Myth. I'm gonna hope to add up that into my next comic, and I'm hoping that I can get that script ironed out very quickly. And I'm still editing the 2024 books for the SJS Direct catalog. And if you guys want to help the channel out, you guys can pick up the 2023 books, John Haynes Godbreaker and John Haynes 1987, which are available on Amazon.com right now in paperback. And you can also pick up the first full SJS Direct comic, John Haynes at Death's Door. Now, with all that perfunctory done, I'm going to get into tonight's topic. And tonight's topic is where I take Hollywood executives to the barbecue as related to the WGA and SAG strike. Now, this week, the Screen Actors Guild, or SAG, the union that represents 160,000 actors, just decided to join the writers who write the scripts and are a part of the Union of the Writers Guild of America on the picket lines. And both of these groups are looking to try to get fair compensation for their work in Hollywood. And I believe that they are right on point as related to why they are striking, because when I look at the actions of these Hollywood executives, it's all their fault that they're in the jam that they're in right now. Now, the reason why we have this in this WGA and SAG strike going on right now, this double strike, the first since 1960, goes all the way back to 1996. Now, back in 1996, we had the Hollywood lobbying Congress as related to the telecom bill, which was supposed to allow the deregulation of media. And with that deregulation of media, what they wanted to do was be able to buy more than one newspaper, one magazine, one TV station, one radio station in a local area. And that's where they wanted to go out here and lobby to get this telecom bill passed. And they were able to do that due to the fact that Bill Clinton was caught up in the middle of his scandal with Monica Lewinsky. And because he was caught up in his scandal with Monica Lewinsky, Republicans were able to get this bill pushed through, and Bill Clinton passed it and signed it into law. And with the Telecom Act, many of these corporations were able to go out here and buy as many TV and radio stations and newspapers and magazines as they wanted. And over the course of the next 5 years, media started to become more and more consolidated. And as it became more and more consolidated, what happened is we got less and less competition. Now, those government regulations allowed for there to be competition because if one person owned a TV station, a radio station, a magazine, a newspaper, or a Hollywood production company, that meant that you had lots of different Prodcos to go to, and lots of different places to get your media broadcast. And that competition, what it did was make it where you could go out here and get a lot more job opportunities for actors and writers, because a person could go out here and have their agent shop a project around, and they could shop it to either some of these larger studios in Hollywood, or they could shop it to some of these smaller prodcos that were all across the country. And depending on where you got your deal, you could get a deal with a film studio, or you could get a deal with one of the cable networks like Lifetime, or you could get a deal with some of these direct-to-video markets. And because of this, there were plenty of opportunities and plenty of jobs for actors and writers in Hollywood. Unfortunately, as the Telecom Act of '96 consolidated media, lots of opportunities started going away because many of these major corporations started buying many of the TV stations, many of the radio stations, many of the magazines, many of the newspapers, and even started buying up some of the smaller production companies that went out here and made things like direct-to-video and production companies. And this made it where it became harder for actors and writers to go out here and get jobs. So the opportunities to get jobs started drying up, and the opportunities to get compensated for work started drying up. And this is what led to the foundations for a lot of the problems that actors are having today as related to trying to get compensation, because there are not many places a person can shop a script around now that there are just a couple of companies that go out here and distribute films all across the country. So the amount of jobs that are out here are limited compared to what we had in the 80s and the 90s, because at least back then, if you couldn't get a film at the theaters, you did have a shot at the video stores with Blockbuster and the other assorted video stores all across the country. So you still had an opportunity to get a job. It wouldn't pay as much, but you still had an opportunity to go out here and get a job writing, or you got an opportunity to get a job being able to act somewhere. So you had a opportunity at a job. But as things got more and more consolidated, what this caused was the job market for actors and writers to start to just deteriorate. Now, things continued to get worse after the Telecom Bill of '96, and it got worse because that's when Congress decided to change the signals for television from ASTC to NSTC. And when TV went digital, this also had an impact on the entertainment industry, because many of the studio executives thought, oh, if we go out here and now that we've got consolidated media, what we're going to do is go digital for so-called better picture. But when they went out here and decided to go HD, the audience didn't go with them. And when the audience didn't go with them, this proved to be the second biggest tactical error that Hollywood and the entertainment industry made. Now, again, the first mistake they made was consolidating media and taking away competition. And this second mistake basically took the audience away. So there was no way for them to go out here and make the money that they used to on television, because TV at one time, when it was ASTC, used to have a large captive audience, especially when it was just 3 or 4 big networks and a couple of syndicators. This TV show's audiences were in the millions of people. I mean, I remember when shows like The Cosby Show had 20 million viewers, but these days a hit show barely has 5 million viewers, because once TV went digital, what happened was the audience again did not go with the digital transition, and what happened was the audience decided to go in a different direction. And that different direction was the audience decided to move over to the internet, and it decided to move over to platforms like YouTube, where I and many others have channels. And since the audience migrated to YouTube, the TV audience ratings started to decline, and the viewership for TV started to decline, especially with young people. And as the audience started to decline, as related to especially young people, this is where studio executives really started to get desperate. And they started to get desperate because they needed to try to get big money because they were losing money on television with the whole conversion to digital. And they were also starting to lose lots of money as related to the lack of competition, because with there only being a handful of studios, there wasn't much competition out there. So that meant all of these projects really had to hit, or they would lose a bunch of money overall. Because if there was competition, what this would do was, if people went to the theater to see one movie, they might possibly go see another. But if there's no competition, there are fewer movies and there's fewer reasons to go to the theater. So yes, there were a lot of blockbusters with films like these superhero movies, but there weren't a lot of smaller budgeted films. And Hollywood's big money was never really made with the blockbusters. It was always made with the small budget films. And the studios really stopped making those kinds of movies, especially when we started to enter into the mid 20 teens. Now, as we entered into the mid 20 teens, that's when the studios decided to stop making these smaller budget movies like The Bad Teachers or some of the other movies like American Pie. They stopped making these smaller budgeted movies and just focused heavily on big budget movies. And this is where Hollywood started to go into a real tailspin creatively, because again, with the consolidation, they wound up not really having the money to spend on small budget projects. So they put a lot of money into big budget projects. And as they put money into the big budget projects, they started to heavily rely more and more on things like the MCU, the DC Extended Universe, and lots of franchise movies. And this is where Hollywood started to wind up further in a jam, relying more and more on the international box office. And as they relied more and more on the international box office, they were really desperate as related to trying to maintain their status quo. And as they did this, they were trying to pander to other audiences, like many of the social justice warriors. And this really started to have a negative impact on their box office. Now, as this was having a negative impact on their box office, they were spending more and more money on movies and as related to their budgets, and spending more and more on these budgets and hoping to get bigger and bigger profits. And as they were making big profits on movies like the MCU and many of these franchise movies, what they were looking to do was hope to try to stay in business, but really their business model was fundamentally flawed. And it was fundamentally flawed because I've seen the same approach used in the late 1960s as related to epic movies, war movies, and musicals. And what happened was the studios now are in a jam, and they're in a jam based on their own mismanagement. And what they want to do now is not go out here and compensate writers. What they want to do is try to cut their costs by not paying writers and actors what they deserve. Now, when it comes to writers and actors, they are supposed to get fair compensation, and they're not getting fair compensation as related to what Hollywood has been making on these movies as related to their international box office. Now, many of these films, they make billions of dollars, and the studios have had record years, but they haven't gone out here and compensated a lot of their writers fairly. And they also don't want to give them standards as related to things like AI, which are a serious part of intellectual property, because AI, if it's allowed to go out here unchecked, could allow studios to take somebody's likeness and use it without their permission, and then use their likeness to go out here and make profitable business on their likeness without ever fairly compensating somebody for something if they go out here and use their likeness in a project. And again, the actors have every right to demand their rights as related to AI, and the writers also have a right to make demands as related to AI, because AI related scripts, again, as I see it, they cannot really measure to that of a real writer. And this is where I have an issue with some people out here, especially some of these executives who want to think that they can use AI to replace a screenwriter. Well, you can't use a AI to replace a screenwriter because a screenwriter has something that AI will never have, and that is life experience. Now, I hear some people, they will go out here and say, oh, those writers don't deserve any compensation. But if you are in this business, you understand that if you are hired to do a job, you should be compensated. You should be able to get royalties for any work that you do. I mean, if you put in 8 to 12 hours on a story like I do, you deserve to be compensated for that work if that work is used on a streaming service platform, or if it is used in syndication, or if it is broadcast on other platforms. You put in the hours on that work, so you deserve to get compensated for that work. I mean, once you do that work and that work is finished, yes, you should get residuals for that work. I mean, if I put in, like I worked on a story like this for 2 weeks in a first draft, but I work about a whole year just editing a book like John Haynes, Godbreaker. Again, this book is maybe about 70, 80 pages, but it takes a year for me to get this book together from front page to last and make sure that the book is as solid as it is. And it takes me almost a year and a half or 2 years to write a book like John Haynes, 1987. Again, these books take time to write. And when you're a screenwriter, you take just as much time to write and put your fingers to the keyboard to make everybody's favorite TV characters come to life. And it takes time to craft those kinds of stories. And that's what many people in Hollywood and most people don't understand. It takes time to go out here and craft a story. It's not something that you can just do really quickly, because when you write out here, you're not just writing it more than just one time. When I write a story like John Haynes' Godbreaker, I take this, once I write the first draft, I basically have to deconstruct this entire story, looking for plot holes, looking for story points that aren't clear. And sometimes I have to sit down and read this entire story aloud from chapter to chapter for 2 to 3 weeks just to make sure it's on point. And even longer for a book like a John Haynes, 1987. This takes a lot of work. And this is what Hollywood wants to minimize, the amount of work that a writer does. I mean, a writer goes out here, when you're on a story, you are working for hours and weeks on end, trying to refine what you've written, because the first draft is just you sketching out the ideas. The second draft is just you making sure everything is cohesive. And by the third draft, this is where you see if everything is synergizing. And usually it takes 3 to 4 drafts to just get the book on point. And with the screenplay, it is refined, and you have to refine this multiple times. And this is something that many aren't talking about as related to the work of a screenwriter. A lot of people, what they want to say is, oh, those writers don't really write good stories. Well, a lot of the reasons why those writers don't write good stories has to do with Hollywood executives. Now, your Hollywood executives, like your executive producers and your directors, these are the people who hire the writers. And a lot of times when you see bad writing come about, it's because many of these executive producers and directors really want to have power, and they want to have complete control over the material. So what they do is go out here and hire these inexperienced writers who are maybe fresh out of college, maybe 21, 22, maybe 24 years old. And these young writers, they really don't have enough life experience to be able to tell a story. And because they don't have life experience and all they know is what's on the college campus, this is why you have so much what they call woke or SJW writing, because many of these writers themselves do not have enough life experience to be able to tell a solid story. Because in order to be a good writer, you have to write about what you know. And if you're hiring young 20-something writers, they don't really know much about life. So this is the reason why you have so much terrible content on the air right now. You have a lot of terrible content on the air because executive producers and directors want to go out here and hire young, inexperienced writers. And they hire the young, inexperienced writers to go out here and write what they want. And as those young, inexperienced writers go out here and write exactly what they want and put in the identity politics and the social justice, this is how you get terrible scripts, because these writers cannot really give you life experience that can give you depth, give you layers, or give you any sort of dimension as related to story. No, the only way to get that kind of writing is when you have an older, more seasoned writer, and an older, more seasoned writer has lived a little bit more life. And because they've lived a little bit more life, they can give you a richer, more multidimensional story, richer, more multidimensional characters, richer, more multidimensional experiences, because they've gone out into the world, they've gone out and experienced life. And again, this is where AI cannot compete. A seasoned writer who's been out in the world, a seasoned writer who is coming from life experience, can tell you a much better story than any computer or any what they call SJW or woke writer. No, those writers can't tell a story, but you have those in Hollywood who want to use them as a barometer to say, this is the reason why we shouldn't compensate people for their work. And this, we have some in the public saying we shouldn't compensate people for their work because the writing is so-called woke. But if you are out here and you hired these writers, then you need to go out here and pay them for their work, no matter whether it was good or bad. No, if you went out here and hired someone to do a job, then you have to pay them the same rate. I mean, if you have a mechanic and you have and ask them to fix a car, they're going to go by their book rate. And when you go to a mechanic, the first thing he's going to tell you is certain jobs are going to require a certain amount of hours, and certain jobs go for a certain rate. So when you go to a mechanic who is a person with a skilled trade, you understand that you have to pay for certain services. And the same thing goes for writers and actors. With writers and actors, you have to pay a certain rate depending on the experience and the skill set of the individual. And that's what you have to pay as related to rates. But we have those executives in Hollywood who don't want to pay a fair rate to their writers or their directors. No, because they've gotten away with getting people's work for a low rate for an extended period of time, what they want to do is try to continue getting people for a low rate, especially those individuals who are running the streaming services. The people who run the streaming services are basically pulling what Saban did back in the 90s with the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers when he hired all of his actors non-union. And when he hired all of his actors non-union, he didn't have to pay those actors the standard scale. No, he basically was paying them $50,000 a year, even though he was making millions of dollars on the show, and never really paid those actors for their labor. So that was one of the things that could happen when you go non-union. And what happened with Netflix is a lot of writers were not really getting paid what they were supposed to, because Netflix was skirting the rules for writers' rooms, not really hiring full staffs and not ordering full runs of episodes like they do for network TV. Because on network TV, an order for a full season is 22 to 24 to 26 episodes. And usually you have to pay for the full order, and the writers have to be paid for the full order for the full season. So this is what people weren't getting at Netflix, where they were doing 8 to 10 episodes a season. And what they would do after 8 to 10 episodes is basically pay writers pennies on the dollar rather than pay them full royalties for rebroadcast, which is what they would get if a show was on syndication. If that same show was in syndication, a writer would get paid all of their compensation in royalties. But if a show is on Netflix, all you get paid is your rate, and that's about it. And in some cases, you only get paid scale, and that's not a lot of money when you have to live in LA. And what you have to do when you live in LA is you got to pay really expensive rent. If you have a home, you have to pay really expensive property taxes, really expensive groceries. And if you're working, yeah, you're working on a TV show, but that TV show basically pays the same as a teacher. So I can understand where the writers are coming from. Again, you're working 8 to 12 hours working on revising these scripts after you write them. You're working with executive producers and directors who will have you change the script up every day with paint pages. I mean, you're working all these hours, but you're not really getting paid much. I mean, it's not enough to live on, and you're not getting royalties that will take care of you. So I can understand why the writers are on strike. I can understand why they decided to not continue on with this deal, because it was a raw deal for them. And it was a raw deal for them because they were not really getting paid what they were worth. Again, these shows go out here, and again, these shows get big numbers on Netflix. Netflix gets billions of dollars in subs. Amazon gets billions of dollars in subs. You get Warner Brothers Max getting billions of dollars in subs. You got Hollywood studios getting billions of dollars at the box office. But the writers, in some cases, if they weren't getting that deal for their screenplays, where they only got 3 to 5% of $100 million budget, which again, 3 to 5 out of $100 million, that's $3 to maybe $5 million if you got a good deal with a good agent. And even then, you have expenses with that. You have the agent's commission, you have a manager's commission, you have your taxes, which take a good chunk of your money, and state taxes, and then you have other business expenses like your internet, your phone. You're not really coming home with a lot of money, but you have a lot of people thinking, oh, writers make a lot of money, but they really don't in comparison to what the studios make from their work. And again, if it wasn't for the writers, the studios really would not have much of anything, because everything starts with the script. I mean, if you want to make a good movie, you got to start with the script. And it's better to pay for a good script rather than try to go out here and try to cut corners, which is what Hollywood has been doing. And that's why many of their movies have been failing at the box office, because they've been trying to cut corners because they don't want to pay writers, and they haven't wanted to pay writers for years. This is one of the reasons why they don't want to go out here to screenwriters like myself and green light a new original project, because they don't want to pay new writers, and they don't want to pay new writers because they don't want to share the wealth. So what they do is go out here and look to find the cheapest person and the most inexperienced person they can find, because they know a seasoned writer like myself, who knows the system, knows that they're going to demand certain things. They're going to demand to get the 3 to 5% off the budget if they're making a film. They're going to demand being a part of a union. And they're also going to go out here and demand that the other expenses are taken care of, like their health care, like insurance. Again, they're going to demand that they're taken care of, because if these movies are going to make hundreds of millions of dollars, of the possibility of it, that they want to do is get that piece of the pie for themselves. Moreover, they want to make sure that they continue getting opportunities, because these days opportunities are extremely limited compared to what it was in the 1980s and 1990s. I mean, in the 80s, you could shop a script around, an agent could shop a script around. If they couldn't get a deal with a studio or just get a script bought, they could go out here and sell it to a direct-to-video company. And a lot of times Hollywood was buying scripts and wasn't even making the scripts at all. That's something else people don't know. Hollywood buys lots of scripts and does not go out here and use them. This is something that has been done for years, and they will buy a script, let it sit in limbo for years, and maybe never use it, and they'll buy it just to keep other people from getting it. So that's something people don't know what Hollywood is doing, and they've been doing this for years. Again, they buy scripts and they'll not use them. They'll buy scripts and hire another screenwriter to rewrite them. That's what I talk about in All About Marilyn, about how they can just take your script and change a character from a black one to a white one. If they think the story is good, what they'll do is take that script that with a black lead rewrite it to a white lead, and then tell the same story with another writer who gets the credit along with you. And this happens all the time. And again, these are the type of tactics that they've used for years. And they go out here and say, oh, we don't want to compensate writers. And they also want to say they don't want to compensate actors. Now, yes, some actors make $20 million a year. Some even make $50 to $60 million a year if they're in big budget movies. But this is not just about the salary. This is also about making sure that actors receive other benefits that they desperately will need when they get older. Now, I talk about this in depth and all about Marilyn, about how a lot of actors, once their shows end, they're just out there struggling. And this is what SAG wants to protect. They want to protect actors' ability to maintain their health care when they get older and they're not working, so that they don't wind up falling through the cracks. And they also want to go out here and make sure that actors are taken care of as related to their royalties when they get older. Because I talk about this in All About Marilyn, about how sometimes you're trying to live off these royalties, because sometimes after you do a show or you do a series of movies, sometimes you wind up in a place where you're in a bit of a slump and you cannot really pick up another gig. And sometimes it can go as long as a year. Sometimes it can be 5 years. Sometimes it can be either 10 or 15 years. You can go without a gig, and all you've got are your royalties. And this is how you live, in addition to whatever job you can find. I mean, it can be a very long time before you can pill up a gig. And again, those royalties are very important. And this is another thing that I can agree with the WGA and SAG on. Yeah, we got to look out for your royalties, and we got to make sure that they're not really taken away from you, like what companies are doing, like Warner Brothers and Disney are doing, talking about how they're just taking stuff off their streaming platforms, all for tax write-offs. Because if that project isn't playing, you're not making money, and that money you make could be the very difference between you paying your bills and you winding up in poverty. I mean, if this project that you had for many years that was is running in syndication or running on streaming, if that's out here and it's not playing, and the studio decides, oh, I want to take a tax write-off, that means you just lost all your long-term revenue, and there's no way to prevent you from losing your long-term revenue, because the studio just wants to make a few fast dollars. And again, that's something that really needs to be pushed back on, because a lot of people wound up losing a lot of money when their projects like the Batgirl movie and many animated projects at Warner Brothers got shelved, and many other what they called woke TV series wound up getting shelved. And again, that's something that has to be fought against, because this is people's lives. This is how people are going to live once their careers start to go into that slump period. And again, every actor and every writer goes through these soft and slow periods. So that money can be the difference between, again, you paying your bills and feeding yourself, or having enough money to just go out here and be able to go out here and make ends meet. Sometimes those episodes that rebroadcast in reruns and syndication and streaming, this is, again, the people don't get compensated on streaming, but they do get compensated on syndication, on cable, and other networks. So this money is very important to people. And what I find to be quite disgusting is the just cavalier and just disrespectful attitude that many executives like Bob Iger have. Now, guys like Bob Iger and David Zaslav, they have basically dismissed the strikes, and they've dismissed the strikes by going out here and saying things like, according to one report, they're going to try to wait to starve the writers out and hope to get a deal. And in the case of Bob Iger, he has been on record saying that the WGA is being unrealistic. And this is a very frame of mind that comes from a very disconnected and detached frame of thinking. It's very disconnected from the people who you have working for you. I mean, to say that the writers are being unrealistic because they want to get compensation for their work while you get a raise, that really just shows extreme arrogance, and I dare to say hubris, because you're going to sit there and get a raise in your contract renewal for the next 2 years, And you're sitting there talking about how these writers are being unrealistic for wanting to have standards as related to streaming, wanting to have standards as related to television, wanting to have standards to ensure that members can go out here and get paid and go out here and ensure that a union worksite is maintained, because a union worksite for writers is very important, because in a union on worksite, a writer won't have their work butchered or abused to the point like it is in a non-union workshop, where they basically just be pink paging your stories all the time, because your work is not considered that important. It's just anything the executive producer and the director wants. So this is very important, to make sure that there is a full writer's room and make sure that there is a full schedule for episodes, so that companies won't go out here and try to skirt things like Netflix has been doing for years with its 8 to 10 episodes. No, you would have to do under the standards of the WGA, which is you would have to have a 13 episode half season for these shows like a Daredevil or a Luke Cage, or even some of these Disney Plus shows. All of these shows would have to meet a same criteria like they are on cable, where these shows have to meet a minimum of 13 episodes in order to go out here and be considered a full syndicated or cable season, or a 26 episodes for a network season. And people would have to be paid as related to that criteria. Moreover, you would have to have a full writer's room, so that there would be staff on hand, so that there would be enough work to go around for all of the writers. And if these studios don't have money for that, then I have to say what they said in Goodfellas that Professor Black Truth quoted: "F you pay me. It's not the problem of the writers or the actors that the studios ran out of money as related to the billions of dollars in debt that Warner Brothers Discovery is in and the losses Disney took. No, F you pay me, because if you had the money to greenlight the projects, then you're going to have to get the money to pay people, and then you're going to have to go out here and get the money to go out here and pay those residuals on those projects. Because if you couldn't have the critical thinking to go out here and count the cost as related to those projects, then maybe you should not be an executive. Because where I see the problem as related to this strike isn't really the writers or the actors. I really see the problem with this strike being with executives who have been out here participating in excess for over 2 to 3 decades. And over the course of the 2 to 3 decades, as they've consolidated media, all these people have basically just gotten more and more filled with hubris as they've gone out here and had all of their great successes. And as they've had all of their great successes, many of these individuals just did not want to take a look at history and see that they are basically participating in the same failed paradigm of the late 1960s, where executives back then became disconnected and detached from people. And as baby boomers were turning into teenagers, what they did was continue to think they could continue to make the same movies over and over again, even though the world was changing. Even though the world was changing, we had executives who were sitting there still thinking, oh, let's continue to make musicals. Let's continue to make war movies. Let's continue to make epic movies about classic literature. Meanwhile, Americans were dealing with the civil rights movement. Meanwhile, Americans were dealing with the feminist movement, even though Americans were dealing with the Vietnam War and watching their family members coming back in pieces after dying in the battlefields of guerrilla warfare. They were still trying to give people a media that basically was not their experience and not their world. And the same thing is happening right now with many executives like Kathleen Kennedy, Bob Iger, and David Zaslav. They're sitting there disconnected and detached from the viewers, caught up in their archaic business models for things like superhero movies. And they don't see that the audience has changed, just like their previous generation back in the 60s, still trying to sell people a product that they've basically just, it's lost its vogue, This is the biggest tactical error they have made. Again, this is the tactical errors they're making, and they're compounding it with an even bigger tactical error. And that big tactical error is just dismissing this strike, because this strike has just as devastating an implication for media that the telecom bill of '96 did, by eliminating competition, which Hollywood desperately needs, and the TV going digital in 2009, which forced the migration of people to the internet. Now, as TV and movies have changed, Hollywood just refuses to adapt, and it just goes out here trying to make the same movies over and over again, still thinking that they can push the same old business model, not understanding that the world is changing around them. And you have these old executives out here still thinking they can greenlight old 30 and 40-year-old projects like Star Wars and Indiana Jones and these superhero movies, and sitting there with a baffled face, wondering why these projects have flopped. Well, these projects are flopping because the audience has outgrown them, the audience has grown tired of them, and a lot of the younger people don't see their lives on screen. And because they don't see their lives on screen, they don't really have a reason to care. And again, this has little to do with the actors and the writers. This has to do with executives who really don't have a vision for what type of media they want to make. This has to do with executives who basically have tunnel vision. I mean, you have executives who are so focused on making money that they've forgotten how to make art. And that's where guys like Quentin Tarantino and Martin Scorsese, they are right in saying that cinema is dead and that there's a problem, because we've got executives who are out here with tunnel vision, and these executives don't want to hear any sort of pushback. So this is where they go out here and push their ideas through these quote unquote woke writers. And as they go out here and find these young 20-somethings to go write whatever they want, they go out here and get these this is why they make the terrible movies, because you're hiring someone who really has no idea what they're doing, and you yourself have no vision. So you've got an executive with no vision who is leading a dysfunctional project, and they hire an inexperienced writer to try to write their ideas into a script. And this is how we wind up getting these very terrible movies, which are passively about representation, but aggressively promote racism, because these writers, while they talk about, oh, I want to put all this representation in there, what they do is go out here. They've never known a Black person. They've never known a Latino person. They've never known an Asian person, but they're going to write about these people. And what they do is make a mess. They go out here and they write this stuff at the behest of these white executives. And these white executives, they'll sit there and say, oh, we're talking about diversity and inclusion and representation. But the problem is, they don't go out here and give opportunities to Black writers like myself. No, they don't go out here and give opportunities to Black writers to talk about the Black experience. They don't go out here and hire talented writers. And if they do hire a Black writer, they go get a Black bootlick. And again, the experiences of a Black bootlick are completely different than the experiences of a Black person. So these executives, they are the real reason why Hollywood is on strike right now, because you've had years and years of these incompetent people at the top. And these incompetent people at the top, they just go out here and make the same mistakes over and over again. And they call it success, but I call it insanity, because the definition of insanity is doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. And even worse, being arrogant enough to not admit that you're making mistakes. And the biggest mistake that Hollywood is making right now with its executives is, again, dismissing this strike, because if this strike were to go on into the fall, this could be the thing that basically winds up putting another major crack in the Hollywood structure, because with this strike going on, You may be able to say you have content available for some time, but eventually what's going to happen is people are not going to be interested in watching your content because one, a lot of people don't like a lot of the content that's out there, and two, you're not going to be able to promote the content because your actors cannot go to the press junkets. They can't promote the material. So it's going to be a lot harder to go out here and promote whatever is left. And the whole thing is, as you're going out here and you're struggling as related to content on television and on the movie screens, what's going to happen is that audience is further going to migrate to YouTube and other platforms like Rumble and Odyssey, because YouTube is, while it's the main platform for people broadcasting themselves, there's also Rumble and Odyssey, because Rumble and Odyssey allow you to see different kinds of content that oftentimes gets flagged on YouTube. So this could be a boom for the YouTuber, because most people, they are going to go and look for fresh content because there's no new TV episodes. So that's going to be one reason why people who have already not migrated over to YouTube to migrate over to YouTube. And if there's no movies on, they'll just be going over to check out YouTubers over the weekend. So basically, these Hollywood executives have taken themselves and put themselves in a major place where they're going to take a big L by, again, minimizing this whole strike, because what's happening now is, while these networks don't have any content, what will happen is the YouTubers, we produce content every day of the year, and we're always constantly producing fresh content. And this is where viewers are going to find people, especially if they go to the weekend lives. They're going to find people's content. They're going to find people's channels, and YouTubers' channels are going to grow just like they did during the pandemic. This is how a lot of people found my channel. This is how people found many other people's channels. I mean, this is how Kevin Samuels became a superstar. I mean, people, they found YouTubers, and if there's no content, Hollywood basically gave all of its audience to the YouTube platform. So Hollywood executives, they have been making a lot of tactical errors that have cost them audience since 1996 in their attempt to try to gain control and try to eliminate competition. They have wound up losing more and more market share of the American and audience all over the globe. And they're not as dominant as they were back in the 90s and the early 2000s. No, ever since media started to conglomerate in 1996, while they thought they were going to get more control by consolidating legacy media, they have been losing all of their audience to digital media, and they wind up losing their audience to digital media because people will migrate if they can't find content. And this is where Hollywood is underestimating its overall competition. And as someone who's taken a panoramic picture of the media since he was a teenager back in the 80s, again, this is the greatest tactical error I have seen ever since the telecom bill and TV going digital. I mean, this could cause a major further shift of the audience. And if Keating or Rourke is right, and they go out here and have the strike until December, there may not be any people coming back to television, because the 2007 writers' strike basically was one of the other things, in addition to TV going digital in 2009, that basically put a nail in TV's coffin, because with the 2007 strike, people just didn't come back to TV, and the studios canceled a lot of shows. And again, that first started the migration to the internet. And with TV going digital in 2009, this further led to people migrating to the internet, to YouTubers. So I just see this as, again, major tactical error. Now, a lot of these studios are sitting there saying they're hurting for money. But again, I say to them, if you pay the writers, if you pay the actors, you pay these people what they're worth, you pay people what they are worth, because it'll pay off in the long run. Because if you pay people, it'll pay you off in the long run. Because if you don't pay them, it's going to cost you later on. And what it's going to cost these studios is more and more market share. You're going to have to deal with more and more competition because you're opening up these different opportunities for others to slip in and make content. You're opening the door for others to come in and make different opportunities to take audience from you. I mean, what happened with Sound of Freedom reminds me again eerily of what happened in 1967 when they released the movie Born Losers. I mean, nobody thought this movie Born Losers, made by Tom Laughlin for $160,000, was going to do anything. But when Tom Laughlin released this movie, it became the first blockbuster, and it became a blockbuster because it resonated with viewers who were coming out of the Vietnam War, who were looking at a country that was changing, looking at all of these different things that were going on in the country. So when I watched that movie, Born Losers, back about in the 90s, and I watched it again a couple more times, I began to understand why this film resonated at the time, because the kids who were out here and the baby boomers who were coming out of the Vietnam War, this was a film that resonated with them. And the film Sweet Sweetback, when it came out in 1971, what that film did again was show that there was a viable audience for Black films, which Hollywood ignored for years. And again, here was another film that was a blockbuster. And this is the same thing that's happening with Sound of Freedom. I mean, Sound of Freedom, it basically beat Indiana Jones at the box office. And because it did so well, you got movie theaters saying, hey, we're tired of buying your Hollywood movies, and we're going to go get this movie and put it in our theaters. We're going to put this in because we want to make money. And the same thing happened with Born Losers and Sweet Sweetback. And again, this is where Hollywood doesn't see where it's got a problem. No, they think they've got it made because they've got all these films in the can. But the whole thing is you've got a lot of bad films in the can. And if there are a lot of indie films coming out that resonate with people, what's going to happen is those films are going to make money, and the theaters are going to pick them over Hollywood films. And that's where Hollywood has really, again, you got a lot of executives who are detached, a lot of executives who are filled with hubris, a lot of executives who I say are too comfortable because they're so used to wheeling and dealing on old franchises, they can't see that the rug is about to get yanked out from under them. And because they're so caught up in the little world that they've created, they can't see the reality of a changing entertainment world. And these executives like a Bob Iger or a David Zaslav, they're not seeing the reality that I have seen from being a guy who's been studying this business for over 25 years. A guy who has studied this business for over 25 years. I was seeing as far back as 2016 that there were going to be problems with superhero movies. And that's when I said they needed to really slow down on them and focus on developing small budget projects. And I was looking at it and saying, look, you guys really need to slow down with this. You need to just really chill with all of these type of movies because it's too much product coming too soon. And this is where they were having problems. And any smart executive would have been starting to invest in small budget movies and greenlighting small budget movies for release, because that's where they would have had some revenue coming in. But many of these studio executives, they're just so caught up in their tunnel vision as related to big budget movies and international box office that they don't really think about what the big picture is. And this is something I talked about again in a previous live stream when I said that they need to make movies about people, and they haven't made movies about people. And that's where Sound of Freedom came in, gave us a movie about people, gave us a movie about people and a story about people. And this is where Hollywood executives really are underestimating their competition because they dismiss Sound of Freedom as a fluke. But I see it as a gateway into opening the door to, again, those small budget films gaining a lot of ground. And again, the theaters seeing that they can't get any movies from the studios or movies promoted from the studios will be going with a lot of these smaller films because they're already suffering since the pandemic. I mean, the theaters have been struggling for years since the pandemic, and they're looking for a movie that's going to pull them a profit, and they are looking for those movies. And since there's no movies going to be made by actors or writers for an extended period of time, this opens a door for them to start making deals with the theaters and going out here and getting more exposure for their project. So what Hollywood is doing by having a prolonged strike is they're going to go out here and open a door for their competition on YouTube, open a door for their competition from independent filmmakers, open a door for independent writers like myself, and open a door for new Black media. I mean, I see a huge door open for new Black media to fly right through. And new Black media has been, again, doing damage to mainstream media for the last good 10 to 15 years. And new Black media has a major opportunity to open a door and keep that door open, because if audiences can't get mainstream media from legacy media outlets and get projects from legacy media, guess where they're going to go? They're going to new Black media, especially a lot of Black viewers. They're going to go to new Black media. And that's where Hollywood executives have made, again, a huge tactical error as related to the Black audience. They've made a huge tactical error because this opens the door for Black creators to come through. It opens the door for Black artists and Black creators to have an opportunity to open that door. Again, door is wide open. And again, all due to executive hubris, because these executives think that they've got it made. Many of these Hollywood executives, like your Bob Igers and your David Zaslavs, they sit there and talk about how unrealistic the writers are being, not seeing how their perception of reality has become completely distorted, because they're sitting there thinking that their business model for blockbuster movies can go on. But from my studies of the late 1960s and watching things like the MGM documentary, there's no way that they can continue to go on. These superhero movies are just so bloated and expensive. There's no way for them to go on, because when you're spending $200 to $300 million on a movie and relying on foreign box office to get you past the profitability mark, that's when you have a house of cards, and you have a house of cards that's unsustainable, and you have a house of cards that is unsustainable because if you're spending this much money on a film, then you're spending way too much money. And this is the same mistake that Hollywood made with movies like Cleopatra almost 60 to 70 years ago. And sadly, many of these executives like Bob Iger and David Zaslav can't see that they're making the same mistake. While they call the writers unrealistic, what's really unrealistic has been the way they've been greenlighting films. They've been gambling heavily on old franchises, not understanding that IPs depreciate over time. And once you put an IP out there in a film and you have it out there for an extended period of time, the value of that IP is going to drop proportionately over time. And just like an old car, it's going to drop because the audience that knew that IP is getting older. And as that audience gets older, that audience no longer is going to be around to watch that material, that nobody's going to go out here and watch that material because they go, oh, that's dad's movie, that's grandma's movie. And yeah, people might be interested in a reboot of that material for the nostalgia. But what's going to happen is that that film or that project is never going to build a new audience with younger audiences. This is what happened with Netflix's Fuller House, because there was a lot of fanfare about Netflix's Fuller House bringing back that 80s sitcom from ABC to Netflix. However, they found out after a couple of years, the audience that came was an older audience. It was not a younger audience, and that was the main reason why they canceled Fuller House. Now, somebody had dropped a comment to me asking why I didn't like reboots, and I just said the reason why was because it doesn't get you a new, younger audience. You want to get the new, younger audience because the new, younger audience, that's what advertisers want in order to sell their products to. They don't really want this older audience because the older audience is, one, set in their ways for the products that they like, and two, the older audience only is coming for nostalgia. So the show is not going to resonate with a younger audience, and that's why Fuller House wound up failing after having early success, because it could not bring in new audiences. And that's why these old franchises that these executives are trying to hold on to, they have been failing drastically. I mean, Star Wars failed because it was a 40-plus-year-old franchise. Indiana Jones failed because it's a 40-year-old franchise. I mean, if you wanted to do these type of franchises, again, you would have to refresh them with new characters. Like in the case of Star Wars, you would have to do something like New Republic. But instead of that, they gave us Force Awakens and Identity Politics because they didn't know how to tell a story. And with Indiana Jones, I mean, you could have did maybe one last adventure, but the whole way they did it, they made him look like a pathetic loser. So this was just, again, you didn't really understand that franchises have an end, and you have to know when to wrap things up and focus on something new. And this is where Hollywood's executives have made numerous tactical errors because they've gotten comfortable. They've gotten comfortable, and all they think about is, oh, these superhero movies are going to go on forever. These franchises are going to go on forever. Well, again, no, that's not how it works. In business, anybody knows that a property eventually starts to depreciate. A property starts to get older, and you have to be investing in new material. And that's why it's important to go out here and look for new talent and new material. I mean, you have to look for fresh material. That's what any skilled person in publishing or business like I am does. We look for fresh material. We look to develop fresh material because one of the worst things you could do is start to get comfortable. And this is an argument I've had with one of my family members all the time. He often says that, people need to be comfortable on the job. Well, as I always saw it, comfortable people are the worst you could have because comfortable people are not competitive. And what's happened over at companies like Disney is you've got people like Kathleen Kennedy and many of the other executives over there who are extremely comfortable, and they're playing it safe because they don't need to take risks. Their employment is safe, and that's the worst place you could be if you're in the creative business. If you're in the creative business, the worst thing you could be is comfortable because you're not going out here and taking risks. You're not out here challenging yourself. You're not going out here and seeing what you can do and how you can go out here and tell a story in a different way. I mean, that was one of the things that I try not to be, because when you become comfortable, you lose your edge. And when you lose your edge, you stop being a competitor and you stop looking to contend as related to being a master of your craft. I mean, over the years, I've always looked for challenges to take on when I write. I mean, one of the great tough challenges for me was writing Eternal Night back in 2019. I mean, I had never written a horror novel. I had written a lot of different other like horror type stories like Bride of Dracula and Night of the Vampires and Witches of Eastland. But writing a complete full horror novel, that was a challenge. And I really like taking on challenges like just this year when I was writing Isis Dark Incubus. I mean, you just get a spark of passion when you write, when you take on a challenge. And this is where Hollywood has really had a problem. Its executives, they are comfortable. And this is why we've got all of these bland, mediocre superhero movies, these bland franchise movies that rely heavily on special effects instead of showing us people and showing us people in action. This is why Hollywood is on strike right now. And the thing that I see right now, again, I don't really see a problem with the actors or the writers asking for compensation. I see a problem with comfortable executives, and I see a problem with executives going out here and just playing it safe. Again, they went out here trying to pander to people with these race swaps and trying to play it safe with these franchise sequel after sequel and MCU movie after MCU movie. And now that they're taking losses as a result of them playing it so safe, now they want to say, oh, I ain't got no money, but you got over $300 million to put in a Flash movie. You had over $200 million to put in a Little Mermaid movie. You had over $300 million to put in an Indiana Jones movie. You had all this money to put in movies. So if you could go out here and greenlight financing for those movies, then you can afford to go out here and pay your actors and your writers. And that's why I say F you pay them, because if you can go out here and raise this type of money to make this kind of movie, then you can go out here and spend money to go pay your people. I mean, if you greenlight these projects to go out here and say you've got the money to make this movie, then you got the money to go out here and pay these writers the royalties. You got the money to pay these writers for their health care, and you also have you have an obligation to not use AI, because again, AI ain't gonna give you no story, because AI does not have life experience. What makes a story unique, like a John Haynes 1987, is it's coming from a man who lived in 1987, a man who grew up in 1987, and can tell you about life in 1987. AI can't tell you about how people lived in the South Bronx in 1987. It can't tell you about places that were there, like the Skate Key, which were considered a major spot in 1987. That's what a writer can do, because a writer lived in that time, lived in that area, experienced things in that area, can talk about stuff from that time, and can tell you what happened then. That's what the difference between a writer and an AI writer. Again, an AI writer doesn't have life experience to tell this kind of story. An AI writer can't tell a story like a John Haynes Godbreaker. No, an AI writer can't tell you about a black man having power. An AI writer can't tell these kinds of stories. No, an AI writer cannot tell that story, because again, an AI is a computer program. It is not a person. It is not a person who lived life. And that's the reason why Hollywood executives are having trouble, because they get stories from people who don't live life. And because they don't live life and don't experience life, what happens is that there's nothing there that has a heart, doesn't have a soul, doesn't have layers, doesn't have nuance. And this is where we have to draw the line with AI, because AI is not alive. And since it's not alive, it can't tell you about life, and stories are about life. And that is the big problem that Hollywood has as related to AI. And again, they want to go out here and take the likenesses of someone and say, oh, he starred in this movie, so we have copyright over the movie, so we can just take a person's likeness. And again, that's ethically wrong, because this person's likeness is theirs, and they have rights over that likeness. I mean, I can look at legal precedent over Bela Lugosi, the late Bela Lugosi. I mean, his family protects his likeness because he is considered to be the iconic Dracula, and you have to get permission from Bela Lugosi to use his likeness if you make a toy or a product. And the whole thing is, if every entertainer out here, they should have that same legal right over their likeness. I mean, every entertainer and their estate should have rights over their likeness, to ensure that a studio doesn't just take their likeness and use it like they did in some Diet Coke commercials back in the 90s. I mean, we should have rights over our likenesses as related to copyright and trademark. And again, this is something that should be legally established, not only with SAG and the WGA, but it needs to be established in federal court. We need really federal legislation, because a writer's work should be something that they should be able to get compensated for at long after a project is canceled. Because if a corporation is making money by selling it in syndication, if they're making money by going out here and putting it on a streaming service, then if that writer was paid for that script and are entitled to royalties, then yeah, they should have those royalties. They should have that compensation, and they should have that compensation because it's something that you worked for. And that's where a lot of people, they are getting it twisted. Because when I was listening to people, I was on Twitter and I was listening to people saying, oh, those writers write garbage. Those writers write bad. No, writers only write what the executive producer and the director tell them to write. I mean, the showrunners are the ones who run the show. The executive producer runs the movie and the TV show. So they only write what they are told to write. And if they don't have enough life experience, then you're not going to get any sort of feedback to let you know, okay, what you're writing is really stupid. Like in the case of Amazon's Lord of the Rings with the black hobbits and stuff like that, and the so-called diversity hobbits. I mean, this is a story set in Middle Earth in medieval Europe. How are there going to be all of this diversity at that time? Critical question I would like to ask those who run Amazon. I mean, how is it that you're going to have all of this diversity at that time? And then I look at other types of projects that are out here that they've done. I mean, you're sitting there trying to make projects, but again, because your writers don't have enough experience, they write stories that make no sense because they're talking about so-called representation, but that representation is coming from racist executives who want to, again, passive-aggressively promote diversity, but the whole thing is they don't want to include black writers, they don't want to include black performers, and again, they don't want to include black people in roles behind the camera outside of a bootleg here or there, but they want to sit there and say, oh, we're upset about people going on strike to the point where we want people to lose their homes. I mean, that just is, again, unethical as I see it, and saying that they're unrealistic. Well, I look at these executives and they're being extremely unrealistic because you're sitting here, you've greenlit a lot of garbage over the years, and you have money to pay for garbage, but when people want to get compensation and want to get paid for their work, you ain't got no money. And to me, when you make that claim, you show me how full of it you are, because you're saying, oh, I ain't got no money to pay people higher wages. I ain't got no money to pay higher royalties. I ain't got no money to go out here and pay people for their labor. But you want to go out here and try to say you were making these record profits. Well, that doesn't work, because if you make record profits, you gotta pay people. I mean, when I go out here and I do a project and I ask an artist out here to do a cover like Mike Williams for John Haynes 87, or I ask an artist like Bill Walker to do a cover for Isis Legacy, I have to pay the price for that labor. I mean, for an artist to spend out their hours of their time to design my covers, or Antonio Balderi to design the whole comic for John Haynes at Death's Door, I mean, this is time and money. Again, people's time is worth money. And if you want their work and you want quality work, you got to pay for it. I mean, you can't go over to Fiverr and go find some discount artist, because you'll get what you pay for. And the same thing with the entertainment industry. If you go to Fiverr for your actors, if you go to Fiverr for your writers, then you're going to get Fiverr quality. But if you want high quality, you got to go pay for high quality. And a seasoned writer is worth the money. And this is where, again, I have an issue with a lot of people on social media who want to discount and minimize writers. There's a difference between a seasoned writer like myself, who has over 25 years of experience, and a writer who's just coming into the game at 21, 22 years old. And you get what you pay for. If you hire a guy with 25 years of experience, he's going to, or she is going to give you a lot more detailed, more deeper story than a writer who only has maybe 1 or 2 years of life experience. Because when you come out of college, yeah, you may know a subject, but you don't know life. You haven't really met many people. You've never really had many life experiences to allow you to gain a perspective of the world. And that's where Hollywood is having its problem with its screenwriters. A lot of people say, oh, the films that they've been made and the TV shows have been made for the 5 years are garbage, and that's why you shouldn't pay writers. No, maybe the studios shouldn't be so cheap. Maybe they need to go out here and find a seasoned writer. Maybe they need to go out here and find experienced writers who can go out here and give you a richer and deeper picture. Maybe you would get more of an audience to go see your movies if you spent the money on hiring quality writers and greenlit quality projects, because what you're producing now, the reason why you're losing right now is because you're trying to cheap out. You've been trying to cheap out for the last 5 to 10 years as related to movies, trying to play it safe with franchises, trying to play it safe with superhero movies. Well, now it's time to start spending some money and paying for what it's worth, because you've been comfortable for so long paying for these easy projects. Now that life is a little hard, you don't want to pay for the work. Well, again, I have this to say to the studio executives who say that these writers and actors are being unrealistic. F you, pay them, because if you want to get yourself out of this hole, and not have YouTube take more of your audience, then you better pony up the cash, because if you don't pony up the cash, you may not have an industry left. I mean, I'm seeing Hollywood in the same way I saw Hostess. Hostess was back in 2012 the union decided to go on strike because the company said it was losing money. But the reason why this company was losing money was because management had gotten comfortable, management had gotten complacent, management had not made anything innovative and revolutionary in over 10 to 15 years. And since they had gotten comfortable and complacent, they had lost their competitive edge. And once they lost their competitive edge, this is what led to the company going into a state of decline. And the same thing is happening with Hollywood right now. They have lost their competitive edge, and what they've lost is their ability to go out here and create innovatively. And this is why Korea and Japan and India are catching up with Hollywood, because they've lost their competitive edge. And again, this is where I have an issue. I'm always talking to my family member about this at the dinner table. He's always talking about being comfortable at a job. And I always tell him, no, you can't be comfortable at a job. You have to be competitive, because once you lose your edge, others gain an advantage. And when they gain an advantage, that's when you lose, because that's why you can't get comfortable at a job, because you'll keep doing things the same way instead of learning how to do different things. And instead of you learning how to adapt, what happens is you don't adapt. And what happens is, because you don't adapt, you wind up losing in the end. And that's what's happening to Hollywood now, like Keaton Rourke has talked about legacy hires. The legacy hires are used to doing things the same way all the time. And you have to learn how to shift gears when you're in the entertainment business. I always compare being in the entertainment business to driving a stick shift. You always have to know instinctively when to shift the gears and move the transmission forward. Because if you don't know how to move the transmission forward, what you're going to do is either keep running on that same gear to the point where you break your transmission, or if you're in neutral, you're going to go nowhere. So you always have to know instinctively when it's time to shift the gear. And when you shift the gear, what happens is you're moving the transmission forward and the engine forward and keeping it from breaking down. So what Hollywood's executives do, because they have a lot of legacy people, they're used to being in neutral, or they're used to being in first or third, and they don't know how to move the gears of the transmission forward to fourth or fifth. So this is why they're sitting there trying to get upset. Oh, the actors and writers are on strike. Well, the actors and writers are going to go on strike. They see you making blockbuster numbers. They're not getting a cut of the money. They see you greenlighting these movies like Superman Legacy for $200 and $300 million, and they're seeing, hey, I'm not getting a cut of this money. The 3 to 5% of the production budget, I mean, I'm not getting that much of this, and people want to get their fair share. So when I look at this WAG and SAG strike, I really see that the Hollywood executives have been the problem. They've been the problem for a good, I say, 25, 30 years. They have gotten complacent as they've consolidated their media platforms. They've gotten comfortable as they've made their media platforms, and they're not in a place where they are competitive. Because if you're competitive, hey, if I'm making this money, then it's no problem for me to pay people, and I will pay people because, hey, if I want to continue to do well, I have to continue paying these prices. And again, everything has gone up in the United States. I mean, people's rent has gone up, people's bills have gone, insurance has gone up, their property tax has gone up, their groceries have gone up. But you want Hollywood to continue paying people 2016, 2017 wages, and you don't want to pay people if everybody else is paying more and for things like movie tickets, then you can go out here and pay your writers what they're worth, because that's just all, again, a cost of business. And again, when it comes to business, again, it's just an F you pay me scenario, because again, you got the money to give Bob Iger a raise, then you got the money to go out here and pay people what they're worth. Doesn't matter if the company is on the brink of bankruptcy, that's an executive's problem. And if they don't want to fire people like Kathleen Kennedy, who have basically run the entire Lucasfilm into the ground, then that's not the actor's problem. That's not the writer's problem. That's an executive problem. And it's time to go out here and replace some executives. Because if these executives ain't really making the cut and making the box office, then it's time to get rid of those executives and find some ones who have some vision, have some idea of where they want to go, where they want to take movies to, and where they want to go out here as related to an overall picture. I mean, it's time to get some new executives in executive positions at these studios, because the problem is, again, as I see it, isn't the writers, isn't the actors, it's the executives, it's the people running places like Disney and Warner Brothers. They are the problem. And again, what they want to do is make it where you're blaming writers and other people, thinking you can break them and get nothing. Well, the whole thing is that the people running the comp studios into the ground are not the writers or the actors. They just work there. No, the people running the studio into the ground are the executives. And that's why I take the executives to the barbecue. They're the reason why we're having these strikes, because they are the ones who just basically have mismanaged these studios as we've consolidated media. They're the ones who took away competition by lobbying Congress. They were the ones who created toxic legislation like the Telecom Act of '96 and took away competition and prevented us from having lots of choices. But in a free market, we see that choice is not something that can be legislated away with the oligarchy of media. And what these guys have done is basically, if they go out here and let the strike go on into December, they will have signed their own death warrant and basically put the nail in the coffin of mainstream media. Now, I'm going to get ready to wrap up tonight's stream. And if you guys, I would really appreciate it if you guys would head over to put up some likes on the YouTube. That would really be helpful, because that helps with the algorithm. That really helps with the overall algorithm. Got 16 likes and 27 in the room. If you guys could put some likes up there, that would be greatly appreciated. And if you guys could head over to Amazon.com and pick up some books on the SJS Direct imprint, because I'm having a really slow month as related to sales. And I've had a slow year for sales, and I've got a lot of great positive Black fiction. You guys can pick up, John Haynes 87 and John Haynes Godbreaker on Amazon.com. I would be greatly appreciated. And yeah, I really thank everybody for coming out tonight. Everybody from Ted Cox, D Wood, One Phobos, Keating Rourke, Gabria Bradley, Computer Robots. Glad to see you all here coming out to tonight's show. And I'm really glad to see you all here. So I really want to thank you guys, and I'm asking everybody to head over to Amazon, pick up, some of the books on the SJS Direct imprint. And I'm also asking everybody, help me out by also picking up the first full John Haynes comic, John Haynes at Death's Door. It's available on Lulu right now. This was a book that was a part of the 2022 Kickstarter. And as a part of the 2022 Kickstarter, it was part of the successfully funded project. So I'd also appreciate if you guys would go out here and pick up a copy of John Haynes at Death's Door. This is a great comic. It's a lot of fun. Has a lot of great art. So I really would appreciate if you guys would head over there and pick one up and check out my first full comic. And if you guys want to help me be able to make my next comic or be able to stay on the air, I would really appreciate if you guys drop the donation to the Cash App. That really helps me be able to stay on the air and continue to do the channel. And if you don't want to do Cash App, you can also do PayPal. Again, this helps me stay on the air and be able to continue making more books and more comics and making more videos and live streams. So again, I want to thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream. Really appreciate you guys taking your time with me, and I hope you'll be there for next week's stream. Everybody have a good evening, and everybody have a good night.